much excited to talk to you about some of these concepts, some of these ideas. This is really foundational to doing anything in JavaScript. This is kind of the fun part of JavaScript where you go from writing toy problems and working with arrays and objects to actually writing JavaScript that does interesting things. So this is where we kind of get to cross that chasm and use JavaScript to manipulate HTML and CSS, which is what we do all the time in modern web applications. So let's get into it. I'm going to be spending most of my time on our website, not to shamelessly market Rithm School, but it's a website that I know and have an idea of how the structure of the page works. So we're gonna spend our time here and we'll play around with the basics of working with the DOM. To do that, I'm going to be working in the Chrome DevTools. You can go ahead and write code in a text editor and load that code in an HTML file and go ahead and run your JavaScript that way. That is totally fine. But what's nice about using the Chrome DevTools is you get that instant feedback. So I'm going to view developer JavaScript console. Depending on the operating system you're on, you'll have a different keyboard shortcut, but for me, that is Option, Command, and J. So I'll go ahead and fire that off. And this will put me in the console. The console is where you can write some JavaScript. So you can make variables. You can loop over those. And here I'll just console.log each character. And those are the characters in my name. So any JavaScript that you want to write, this is a nice little sandbox scratchpad to do so. This is really, really great because you can write some JavaScript code and you can see things change immediately on the page as you start working with the DOM, which is great. So what is the DOM? The DOM is a representation of our HTML through JavaScript. I'm going to show you what the HTML on this page looks like, and then I will show you how we can play around with it in JavaScript. I'm going to go to the Elements tab. The Elements tab in the Chrome console shows you the HTML structure of the page. A body element. Inside, I got a bunch of SVGs. Inside, I have a div. In that div, I have another div. In that div, I have this container. And in this container, I've got other divs and so on. This is what the HTML structure of my page looks like. I'm using the arrows just to navigate around. There's also a very helpful tool that I can use here. Select an element on the page to inspect it. So if you ever want to visit a web page and you ever wonder, what's that font they use? What's that color they use? You can go to the Elements tab, click on this handy little arrow, hover over to any part of the page. And you can see on the bottom here, there's a section called Computed, where you can see what CSS has been applied. Here's the font that we use on our website. It's called Newsreader. It's 64 pixels. As you start working with HTML and CSS, you'll be writing this on your own. As you start debugging CSS, this is a really, really powerful tool to kind of play around with. What does the HTML on my page look like? You can find what that looks like using this handy little arrow here. Here's that image. Here's that little icon. Here's an H2 for downloading our syllabus. Here's what the submit button looks like. Here's the background color that was computed. And this is our Rithm red color that we use throughout the website. As always, feel free to throw any questions in chat. Happy to answer those. So as we go through, happy to shout those out, answer them, talk about what's going on here. But the more that you can get comfortable with this tooling right here, and there are endless YouTube videos and articles and documentation, and tons of stuff, even on the Google developers website for how to work with the console. This is a tool you will use as a professional engineer every single day. Whether you use a different browser, Firefox, Safari, Opera, Brave, they all have their equivalent version of this tooling, and it's very similar. But this is a really, really, really good use of your time to learn these tools. This is way more important to learn the tooling than learn right now React and Vue and Angular and Ember and Node and so on. You got to learn how to be a professional and then go ahead and learn all those other nice fancy things that the internet tells you to learn. So you'll get there, no doubt about it. But you want to make sure you're comfortable with the tooling and environment that you're going to be working in. So again, I'm in the Chrome DevTools. I'm in Chrome. If you're using a different browser, there's the equivalent here, but Chrome is an exceptionally popular browser, and that's what I'm using. In the console, I can write JavaScript. In the Elements tab, I can see all this HTML. The reason why I'm showing you the Elements tab is because there is a special object, a global object. You can use this anywhere in your JavaScript code, called document. And document, when I look at it, looks a lot like what we were just looking at in the Elements tab. This document object is how we access what is called the DOM. The DOM is a model, a representation of your HTML that is accessible through JavaScript. It is a way for us to interact, to change, to add, to remove elements on the page through JavaScript. So through JavaScript, I am going to change things on this page. Through JavaScript, I am going to change things on this page. Through JavaScript, I will change things on this page. Now, this isn't a permanent change. If I refresh the page, obviously I haven't like hacked Rithm's website and so on. But I'm going to show you how to use this document object to change things on the page. This is how you add interactivity to a website. Anytime you visit a website, when you click on something, hover over something, submit something, drag something, there is JavaScript that is acting behind the scenes to give you some kind of behavior for when things happen. The first thing I'm going to show you is how to work with this document object. The second thing I'm going to show you is how to listen for an event. And that's really what powers everything. Events are user interactions that they have in the browser. Clicking, double clicking, dragging, dropping, hovering, highlighting, key presses, submitting forms. We're going to write some JavaScript that says, when someone clicks on something, go do something else. When someone hovers over something, go do something else. And that kind of code is what powers pretty much any modern web application that you see. The whole point of JavaScript is to add interactivity to your applications in the browser. What does that mean by interactivity? When your user does something, go and respond to that behavior programmatically. When someone double clicks on this, go ahead and do something. When someone clicks on this, show the drop-down menu. When someone scrolls down, go and load more posts. So anytime you interact with any web page and you see things on the page changing, that's JavaScript. And that is all done through this very, very powerful and helpful object called document. This document object is kind of the bridge between JavaScript and our HTML and CSS. So how do we use this thing? Well, the first thing we need to do is find stuff in the DOM. We need to find elements on the page so that we can add interactivity, so that we can change them. And the way to find elements in the DOM, there are a couple ways, but the most common is to use a method or a function called query selector. And query selector is a function. Notice these parentheses here. That's a giveaway that there's a function being run. And into it, we pass a selector. If you have not written any CSS or done anything in CSS before, that's going to be a little bit tricky. So I'll start with the simple stuff. But to give you an idea, anything you pass in here is a CSS selector. When I say CSS selector, I mean, how do you find something by an element? How do you find something by an ID? How do you find something by a class? I'm going to keep it real simple right now. And I am going to look for this element right here. We can see that this element is an H1 element in HTML. You can see that by using this handy tool in the Elements tab, clicking on it and seeing that it is an H1. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use query selector, which will find the first matching selector, and I'm looking for an H1. And there it is. If I wanted to find all of the list items on the page, there's a method called query selector all, which returns to me a list, something that looks like an array of all of the list items on the page. So query selector will give you one thing and one thing only. Query selector all will give you all of those things. So let's say you need to find every single anchor tag on the page, every single list item on the page. Query selector all is great. But if you just want to find the very first thing, query selector is helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find that H1 again. Query selector H1. You can see in the Chrome console, you get some really nice feedback. If you hover over, it'll just tell you, hey, here's that thing you're looking for. Find me the first div. Oh, cool. Here's the first div on the page. Find me the first list item on the page. Cool. Here's that list item. It's probably somewhere inside this dropdown here, inside this dropdown, and so on. It's somewhere there. Find me the first button on this page, whatever it may be that you want to do. Cool. There's the button down there. So query selector is a method. You can use this on any web page. You can go to google.com and you can go ahead and say, hey, Google, on your web page, where is the first H1? Oh, looks like there isn't one on the page. Is there an image anywhere on this page? Yeah, there it is, right up there. Is there a form on this page? Sure hope so. Yeah, there it is. You can go to any web page and play around with this stuff. That's the beauty of the Chrome DevTools and the console. You can go to any web page and futz around with things. You could really go to Google and you could go ahead and remove all the HTML on the page. Granted, I haven't hacked Google, so if I refresh the page, it's still there. But you can play around with anything, any website using the document object, and that's the beauty of working with the DOM. You have as many playgrounds as you want. Any website you visit, you can ask, how does it do this? What's going on here? What's this button look like? What's this input look like? I really like how they made this nav bar up here. So what's the CSS on that page? Oh, here's that color that Google uses. I wonder what it would look like if we used a different color. Again, I'm not a designer, so if this looks terrible, that's probably why. Here's what it would look like if we changed the color. Again, this is why playing around and learning how to use the Chrome DevTools is critical. If you've ever written some HTML and CSS and your process for writing HTML and CSS is write it in your editor, go back to the browser, write in your editor, go back to the browser, write in your editor, go back to the browser. It's really nice to just have a standardized place to work. So I highly recommend taking the time to just learn a little bit about this tooling and be curious and play around. That's the most important thing. Again, any questions in chat? Feel free to throw those in. Let's go back and find our H1. And here it is. I'm going to store this in a variable. So I'll call this main heading. And I can use this variable however I want. if I examine using console.dir or directory, I can see that there are tons of things that are on this object. There are tons of properties on this element. You're never going to memorize these all. You're never going to master them all. Your goal is to be able to look up when necessary. So you're never going to memorize every single thing about every single element that you have. There are some properties that are more useful than others. The first property, the first thing we can do with our element is access a property called inner text. And inner text will tell you what is the text of that element, setting the bar for coding excellence. If you want to see the text inside for any element, you can access the inner text property. So if we take a look right here, this is a paragraph tag. I'm going to go ahead and find paragraph tag. I can store this in a variable, or I can immediately get its inner text. If you want to see the text of any element on the page, you can access it using inner text. And sometimes you might want to store this in a variable if you want to do lots of things with it. Other times you might just need to find it and just read whatever the text is right away. What's interesting about this is that we can change that text programmatically. And we can do that by assigning it a different value. We're going to use the equal sign or the assignment operator to say, go find me the very first paragraph element on this page and set the text of that element to be, DOM is so awesome to work with. And now I change the text on that page. You're never really, as a developer, going to go to the Chrome DevTools and type this stuff in. You are going to write code that responds to user interactions and so on. But I want to make sure you're just comfortable with these basics here. The best way to test your understanding, go to the Chrome console, open it up, start playing around with things. It's very easy to explore. It's very easy to be curious when working with the DOM. Don't start doing anything with the DOM until you've learned the basics of HTML. If I'm saying HTML element and you don't know what that is, that's a problem. So learn like the very basics of HTML. That's a half an hour or an hour building a very simple website. Spend half an hour or an hour learning the very basics of CSS, how to include CSS, how to add some colors, move some things left and right. You don't have to become an expert by any means. But the DOM is the bridge between HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you're not comfortable with the fundamentals of those three technologies, this is going to be a pretty hard thing to grasp. What do you need to know in JavaScript? How to make variables, how to write functions, how to write loops, how to work with arrays, how to work with objects, everything that is in your basic JavaScript fundamentals course. We have one, everyone has one, the internet has one. You can find that everywhere. But you want to make sure your fundamentals in JavaScript, as well as just basic HTML and CSS are solid. We can change this to whatever we want. We can set the inner text to be hello world. We can change this as many times as we want. This isn't terribly interesting on its own right now, but it gets very interesting when we change this by responding to a user interaction. What I want to show you here is that if you ever want to access the body element, this is the element that basically contains all of your content on the page. You can do that through document.body. That is the same thing as document.querySelector find me the body tag. Since the body tag is so common on web pages, in JavaScript, you can just do document.body. So for those of you that are familiar with HTML, you have definitely written a body tag or used some code to generate a body tag for you. This is the element or the tag that contains all the text and HTML that someone will see on a page. By default, you can always hide what you want, but this is what the user sees. What I'd like to be able to do is when someone clicks anywhere on the page, I want the console.log, amazing. Eventually, this is going to be when someone clicks anywhere on the page, I want to change the text of an H1 or so on or so forth. The way to do that is to find an element, listen for an event on that element, and when that event happens, do something. So what is the element that we want to listen for? When someone clicks anywhere on the page, that seems like the body. What is the body going to cover? Anywhere on the page. If I wanted to, I could also use document.querySelector body. Those will do the same thing for me. I'm just going to use document.body. It's a nice shorthand here. You can go to any web page and type in document.body and you will see the body element. This is ubiquitous. Every HTML page that is structured properly has a body tag. And here's where things get fun. I'm going to show you a very, very nice function called add event listener. An add event listener takes in two very important arguments. What is the type of the event that you want? If you don't know what the event is, you can look right here. Events are fired to notify code of interesting changes. These can arise from user interactions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here is a flat list of all of the possible events that we have. All these events right here. And here is a specific list of every single event that you could think of. When someone copies, when someone cuts, when someone drags, when someone drops, any key press, any pasting, any pointer movement, any scrolling, any touching if you're dealing with mobile devices, any kind of wheel event if you're dealing with an old school mouse that has a wheel in the middle to scroll up and down the page. Any kind of animation, any blurring, anything. There are zillions and zillions and zillions of events. We're going to keep it simple with a click event. And when you use add event listener and you want to listen for a click, here's what we pass in. Here is the name of the event that you're looking for. MDN, ChatGPT, whatever your weapon of choice is, how do I listen for a click event? You got to be able to search for it. You got to be able to Google for it. And that's the important point. So what am I looking for? I'm looking on MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network. This is a great resource for guides in anything JavaScript related, HTML and CSS as well. And here is what I'm looking for. I'm going to listen for a click. When a click happens, I need to do something. In JavaScript, the way that we do that, and this is where having those fundamentals is super important, we use a callback function. So I am going to make a function on the spot right now. And inside of that function, I'm going to console.log the string amazing. This is going to take some reps syntactically. You're going to have to type this out 1, 3, 5, 10, 100, 1,000 times, whatever it may be, until that syntax just gets in your brain. But this is why you can't jump to this until you've worked with arrays, you've worked with objects, you've worked with functions, you've kind of gotten those fundamentals down. So what I'm saying here is, hey, body element, I want you to listen. What does you to listen mean? I want to tell the browser, I want to tell this web page that when someone clicks anywhere on the body, it's going to be anywhere on the page here, right? Document.body is what is highlighted in blue. Anything that's highlighted in blue, this entire page right here. When a click happens, console.log amazing. Okay, I didn't get any errors when I ran that code, but I'm not seeing amazing anywhere. So what do I need to do right now to console.log or to show me in the console the string amazing? Feel free to throw an answer in chat here. What do I need to do? I told JavaScript when a click happens, console.log amazing, but I'm not seeing anything here. So what should I do? Well, if I'm listening for a click, I probably should click. And when I click on this website, every time I click, we're going to console.log amazing. And this is where things can get interesting, because now you can start writing code. When someone clicks on this button, go and do something else. When someone clicks on this H1, go and do something else. So I have a challenge for you all. Go to rhythmschool.com. Open up the DevTools. When someone clicks on the H1, change the text of the H1 to say, I did it. Go to rhythmschool.com, open up the DevTools. When someone clicks on the H1, what do I mean when someone clicks on the H1 here? Maybe first, find the first H1 on the page and store in a variable. That'll make it a little bit easier. When someone clicks on that H1, change the text to say, I did it. So in order to find things, we're going to have to use document.query selector. In order to listen for that event, we're going to have to use add event listener. And in order to change the text, we're going to have to use inner text. I'll give you all a few minutes to try this. And if you can get the first step, get the second step, that's great. If you can get all three steps, wonderful. Even if the first thing you do is just find this, you got to get your hands on the console. You got to play around, you got to be curious, got to see what's going on. So I'll give you all a quick minute to play around and see what you can do here. Because this is all code that you can put in your text editor in JavaScript and load in an HTML file and so on. But this is how it all works. Anytime you go to a web page and you interact with it, this is the code that's powering it. So I'll give you all a couple more minutes, and then if anyone wants to throw in chat some code that they used or some questions that they have as you're going through this. But just want to make sure I'm not just talking to you for an hour, but giving you some time to play around with things as well. Any questions as you have them, any errors you're getting, feel free to throw it in chat. but we'll take one more minute. If anybody has any code they want to share, throw it in chat. Just copy and paste what you put in the console. If there's a typo here and there, it's all good. Cool, nice work, April. Using arrow functions too, you fancy. And April, I see here you're using .inner HTML, which will totally work. But to be a little bit more defensive, I want to recommend you use inner text. It's all good. This will totally do what we want it to do. But inner HTML, if you allow people to dynamically set the inner HTML, they can actually inject script tags and directly inject JavaScript into your website. This is a very common security vulnerability called cross-site scripting. So you only want to use inner HTML if you're really, really, really sure that nobody can mess with it. Nobody's going to set anything dangerous, which is often not the case. So that's why you'll see inner text a bit more commonly done. But by all means, that's all good. Thanks for sharing that. Text content will totally work as well. It doesn't make much of a difference. If you have elements that are what are called text nodes, these are special kinds of elements that are strictly just for text and not actually HTML elements. That's where text content can be helpful. But for all intents and purposes, they're exactly the same right now. Inner text has been around longer, so you might just see it in more references and such, but you know, potato and potato. All right, let's go do this thing. Well, first thing we got to do is we got to go to rhythmschool.com. So feel pretty good about that. I'll just go to rhythmschool.com. And we're there. I'm going to open up the Chrome DevTools, view developer, JavaScript console, or Command Option J. I'm on a Mac. You see a bunch of things here that you want to get rid of. You know, just click on this lovely button right here to clear, or Command K. Control L or Command K, whatever your heart desires. I'll use Command K. And what do we need to do here? We need to go to rhythmschool.com. Did it. Open up the developer tools. Did it. Find the first H1 on the page and store it in a variable. Cool. I'll call this main heading. And that's going to be document.query selector. I'm going to grab that H1. Okay. When someone clicks on that H1, all right, main heading, dot add event listener. This is the tricky part. You could add it to the body, but that means when someone clicks on anything, this is going to run. You can add event listener to any element that you found. So when someone clicks on the H1, what am I listening for? A click. The amount of times that you're going to do this, it's going to happen a lot more than you might think. So if you listen for a cluck event, that's not going to fire. Just watch your spelling. We're going to listen for a click. And when there's a click, we're going to run a function. What are we going to do in that function? We're going to go to our main heading and we're going to change the inner text to say, I did it. All right, did this work? Let's go click. Cool, I did it. There are many different ways you could write this code right here. So if yours did not look exactly like this, that's totally fine. This is just one way to do it. If you wanted to, instead of main heading, you could do this all by just saying document.query selector, add event listener, document.query selector, .inner text. But if you're going to use this expression more than once, it's nice to kind of just store it in a variable, so you have to keep going back and back and back. It's a nice little first check for understanding for some of the basic ideas with DOM manipulation. So let's come back 10,000 feet. What's the DOM? What is the document object model? It's a way to represent pretty much everything in this elements tab. All this stuff right here, all the HTML on the page through JavaScript. How do we get access to the DOM? How do we get access to that JavaScript representation of all the HTML on the page? We have this lovely global object called document. And if we take a look at document, there it is. There's all the HTML on the page. We can open it up. We can examine individual things. This is basically exactly what you get in the elements tab. We saw two methods on the document. Query selector, find me using a CSS selector, find me an element of H1, find me a class of main, find me an ID of heading. If you're not familiar with this syntax, spend a little bit of time learning the basics of CSS. Because this idea of CSS selectors, you're going to see in many, many, many places in programming, not just CSS. There are lots of other ways to find things in the document. I can get an element by its ID. I can get an elements by class name, get an elements by tag name, get them by the tag name, and so on. But the more flexible method is query selector. Query selector is a little bit more general. You'll see it a bit more commonly, especially nowadays, because there are very few performance differences between this and other methods. Find an element, or find all of the elements. There's only one H1 on this page, so I'm going to get a list of only one element. If I use query selector, it just gives me that element directly. So if you need to find all the list items on the page, all the anchor tags on the page, all the divs, all the paragraphs, query selector all is great. You're just looking for the first thing that you can find, query selector. If you want to get access to the entire body element, you could totally do document.querySelector body. Or there's a nice little shorthand in JavaScript to just give me access to the body. And this can be helpful if you want, whenever someone scrolls anywhere on the page, whenever someone clicks anywhere on the page, whenever someone drags anything anywhere on the page, go and run some JavaScript. If you ever need that, whenever anyone does anything anywhere on the page, document.body is helpful. You want to be a little bit more specific, find what you're looking for, and add an event listener onto that in particular. Add event listener works on elements that you found, whether it's the body element or whether it's just an H1. Add event listener, its first argument is a string, which is the name of the event. You can Google around. Once you do this once or twice, you'll know that it's click or submit, or mouse over, or key down, or key up, or key press, or whatever it may be. And then once that event happens, what should we do? In JavaScript, that's signified using a callback function. So when a click happens, go and run a function. What should that function do? Whatever you want it to do. That's the beauty of a callback function. There's no rule associated with it. You just get to choose what you want. And what do I want to do here? Find the inner text of that element and change it. If I take a look right now at these buttons right here, if I take a look in a little more detail at each of these, I will see that these are anchor tags. These are unordered lists with list items with anchor tags inside of them. And each one of these is an anchor tag inside of a list item. If I want to find all the list items on the page, document.querySelector all, li. This is going to give me a whole bunch of list items. I can see here, there are many list items on this page. As I hover over, it'll even tell me which ones are which. If I want to change the text of every single list item on the page, it might be tempting to do something like this. All list items, and then do all list items dot inner text is ha 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 ha. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. It worked when we found one single element, but it doesn't work for every element on the page. In order to solve this problem, we need to loop. This is where knowing about loops is important. We're going to loop over every list item. I can call this whatever I want, of all list items. And for every list item, for every individual element, I will change the inner text to be, no, let's go with Malkovich. And now, Malkovich, anywhere else on this page that I have links, I will see Malkovich, 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 and such. If you haven't seen this movie and don't understand this reference, that's totally fine. We'll go with something we can all understand, like the DOM is awesome. If you need to change every single element on the page, you have to loop over all of those elements. And that's just a thing to watch out for. So when someone clicks, I want to change all of the list items on the page, you'll have to go ahead and loop. Nothing wrong with that. You just got to do it element by element. There is no mass way to do it. Again, the best way to practice with this kind of stuff, just go to any website. I'd recommend Rithm School because I'm biased, but go anywhere you want and just play around. Find all the list items, change the text of all the list items, see if you did it right. You press up and down to get your last, most recent commands. So just like you can in the terminal, up and down will tell you what are all those things you did. So up to get all those things I typed previously, down as I kind of toggle historically. The last thing I want to show you is something else you can change on the page, which is not just the HTML and the text itself, but the styling or the CSS. You can change the colors, the fonts, the width, the height, the dimensions, all through JavaScript as well. And we do that through one lovely object called style. What about odd elements or even elements in the DOM? Well, you could always go ahead and grab them, and then you can go and find the even or odd ones. When you use a for of loop, you don't get the index super easily. So if I wanted to only change the even or odd ones, I might just write a good old let I equal 0, I is less than all list items.length, I plus. And then I could say if I, when divided by 2, is 0, if it's even, then go ahead and change the particular list item I'm iterating at's inner text to be Malkovich. If I go ahead and look now, I will see that some of them are Malkoviches and other ones are not. Some of them are Malkoviches and other ones are not. So same kind of logic applies as with any of these kind of toy problems that you might work through. So lovely question. Always fun to kind of futz around with this stuff and play around in the Chrome console. It's a good place. If you ever need, a lot of people have this question, to make a new line, that is holding down Shift and pressing Enter. So it's a very common question that folks ask of, how do you go to the new line? Shift and Enter. So last thing I want to show you, and then I'll take some time for questions and let y'all play around. It's changing the presentation of the page. Go ahead, grab our main heading, document, query selector, grab an H1, confirm that looks what I want, and that looks good. Previously, we went straight to inner text. But like I showed you, there are so many things that we have access to on this element. All sorts of ARIA, that's for accessibility or accessible rich internet applications. That's what that stands for. So if there are things you want to deal with for folks that are visually impaired, orally impaired, it's a really, really helpful set of tools. You can see all the child elements. You can see the CSS classes applied, the data attributes. You can see the first child inside. You can see the last child. You can see the sibling node. You can see the parent node. You can add all kinds of events, a click, a close, a copy, a drag, an error, a focus, everything your heart could ever desire. Where I want to spend a bunch of our time is this property here called style. And style, when I look at main heading.style, is another giant object with any CSS property you could imagine. This is where being comfortable with the basics of CSS is important. You do not need to know what accent override does or app region does. I honestly could not tell you myself. But you might want to know some more common ones like color. Or you might want to know things like font size. Because if I go and see what the color is, there is no direct styling that's been applied here for the color. It might have inherited it from someone else. So let's go make that red. Okay, that's really awful. Let's go magenta. Nope, that's even worse. Well, then, yeah, look at that, beautiful. If you're like, where do you find all the names of these colors in CSS? The internet provides. So if you're like, I want tomato, ours is actually pretty close to tomato. So yeah, that's not bad. This is how programmatically you can change the CSS properties. Let's go make the font size 44 pixels. Go make the font size 64 pixels. And we're back. Through JavaScript, you can change the styling of a page. Granted, you're not going to be doing too much like this on its own. You're going to put this kind of code in an event listener. Go ahead and change the margin left. Now I just moved it 64 pixels. Moved it another 64 pixels. Let's go take the margin right. Move it back 64 pixels. From the top, move it down 64 pixels. Again, this is not code you're going to be typing manually in the Chrome console as you write more serious programs. But this is where, when the user clicks on something, move something else on the page. You want to build a game of tic-tac-toe. When the user clicks on the top left cell, put an X over there. When the user clicks in the middle of the grid, put an O over there. This is the bridge to add interactivity to your web applications. And it all starts with that document object. But go ahead, I'll refresh the page so we can start again. Document, query selector. That's how we got our H1. That's the thing we're playing around with. We could do it with a paragraph tag as well. So I can call this my first paragraph. And then I can go ahead and look at the inner text. And I can change it. I can go ahead and look at its style and its color, and I can change it. I can go ahead and move it around on the page. These are all things you can do through events. You want to build a game of Snake. You want to build a racing game where every little bit of time something moves across the page or animates, basically. You can do that all with this kind of code right here. So to wrap up, there's good news and bad news. The good news is this is super fun, this is super cool, and this is foundational for everything you're going to do on any website in JavaScript. Let's just go, explore a website here that many of you have visited. I think it's Rithm School. Anytime that I go ahead and click on this right here, go and hide that. Anytime I click on this right here, go show me all these things. Anytime that I start typing, go ahead and show me these different people. These are all events that are happening. And as I type, the data on the page changes. This is all JavaScript. This is all that stuff that you saw that we've been talking about. When I click on this, go and open up this code right here. When I click on more, go and show me these buttons. When I click on X, get rid of that from the page. When I click on this right here, load more information. When I click on this right here, hide those things. This is basic JavaScript. There is an event listener on this thing. And when I click on it, what does it do? Shows some things through JavaScript, through changing the CSS, whatever it may be. And so I go ahead and play around with pieces. So any website that you go to, anytime you find yourself doing this right here, this right here, this right here, any interactivity that I have, this right here, this is all JavaScript that's making it happen. Any interactivity that you have on any website. There's tiny bits of things you can do with CSS that are very clever and so on, but 99% of the time, it's all JavaScript. So let's not spend any more time here than I need to. That's the good news. What's the challenging part? You got to know your fundamentals. You got to know how to work with arrays, with objects, with loops and callback functions and all those pieces, because this is where you really start using it in the real world. So before you kind of venture forth, make sure your foundations are solid. Make sure you're comfortable writing if statements, writing loops, working with basic conditional logic, looping over arrays, looping over objects, accessing objects, dot notation, bracket notation, all those things that are just going to require you to write basic JavaScript and solve some toy problems to really make sure you understand things. And once you can get a good grasp on that, you get to start doing more of the fun stuff. Build a small personal website, build a small web page with basic HTML and CSS. And then one of the best things you can do to level up as a programmer is just build games. Games are great. Silly, small, simple games, tic-tac-toe, a racing game, all the way up to very complicated games, Battleship, chess, Minesweeper. Games are a wonderful introduction for object orientation and data structures and algorithms and all these ideas in just a more fun, contained way. And games are a great place to go ahead and work with the DOM. You could build a to-do list, that's fine, but games are just more interesting, more fun, more logic. And you can start with some simple stuff. Any questions anybody wants to throw in chat? Things I can answer before we wrap up. All right, y'all. As many of you know, Rithm School is a 16-week full-time web development program. We teach JavaScript and Python. I'm one of the lead instructors and obviously love doing this stuff. So I hope to see you in the future on Zoom in any capacity, whether that's for additional meetups. We're also really passionate about bringing additional people into this community. So if there are people you think could benefit from this, would enjoy it, do share, do spread the love. We'd love to teach this stuff and we'd love to build community around it. So thank you all so much for giving me almost an hour of your time on a Friday, which is always appreciated. I hope this was valuable. I hope to see you soon. And thank you all so much and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, everyone.